Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving deep into this whole 10,000 hour rule thing.
Oh yeah, the idea that 10,000 hours of practice equals like automatic mastery in anything.
Right. It's everywhere these days.
Yeah.
But you sent in some sources that have me thinking, is it really that simple?
It's definitely become one of those ideas that just takes off. You know what I mean?
It's like the magic recipe for success. Just put in your 10,000 hours and boom, you're an expert.
Exactly. And it's everywhere. I mean, books, articles, you name it. It's become this like pop culture phenomenon.
So before we all run off to practice for the next decade, let's maybe unpack this a bit. Where did this idea even come from?
Well, you can't talk about the 10,000 hour rule without talking about Malcolm Gladwell.
Ah, yes, Outliers. That was the book that really made it famous, right?
Exactly. He had that whole chapter about those elite violinists.
The ones who'd already racked up something like 10,000 hours of practice by the time they were 20.
Yeah, and he connected that to other success stories like Bill Gates.
Who had all that programming time as a kid because of some lucky circumstances.
Right place, right time. And then there were the Beatles.
Oh, yeah. Their marathon gigs in Hamburg.
Yeah.
Definitely put in their hours.
Gladwell's point was that it wasn't just raw talent, it was hitting that magic number.
I'll admit those examples are pretty compelling.
Yeah.
But when I actually sat down and did the math, 10,000 hours is a lot of time.
It's daunting, right?
Like, even if you dedicated 40 hours a week to something, we're talking almost 5 years.
And that's where I think some of the problems with this rule start to pop up.
Yeah. Is it really just about clocking in the hours? What about natural talent?
Or just plain luck. Being in the right place at the right time.
Some of the sources you sent really push back on this idea.
Oh.
One person said that focusing on the hours could actually distract us from what really matters.
Which is
how we practice.
That's a crucial point. It's not just mindlessly putting in the time.
Right. It's got to be deliberate practice.
Focused, intentional effort to improve weaknesses.
And ideally, you've got someone giving you feedback to keep you on track.
Like a coach or a mentor. Someone who can see what you might be missing.
Exactly. It's like anyone can strum a guitar for hours.
But to really master it, you need to break down those chords, work on specific techniques. Get a teacher to point out what you're doing wrong.
And that brings up another criticism. The 10,000 hour rule doesn't really account for individual differences.
Like some people just naturally pick things up faster.
Right. So are you saying someone with zero musical talent can't become the next Mozart just by practicing 10,000 hours?
Probably not that straightforward. There's definitely research showing that focused training can often beat natural talent. But genetics still play a role. It's complicated.
So talent isn't meaningless, but maybe this rule overemphasizes just time.
Think about it. Even in something like basketball, where height's a big advantage.
You still see those NBA stars putting in crazy hours to hone their skills.
They're not just coasting on their physical attributes. They're constantly pushing themselves.
So it's more about the journey than just hitting that magic number.
The journey, the process, and those elite violinists Gladwell talked about.
They weren't just mindlessly repeating the same scales over and over.
No, they were tackling harder pieces, refining their technique under a teacher's guidance.
Okay, so maybe this 10,000 hour rule, while catchy, is a bit too simple.
Definitely oversimplified.
It gets us thinking about dedication, but it's not the whole story.
And that's what I find so interesting about these sources you sent.
They really make you go beyond that surface level.
And look at all the nuances involved in becoming truly great at something.
It's making me realize maybe we shouldn't obsess over this arbitrary number.
10,000 hours. Exactly.
It's more about understanding the process, the importance of deliberate practice.
And recognizing that talent and opportunity play a role too.
Not everyone has the same resources or support to even put in that kind of time.
Right. It's easy to forget those systemic factors.
So we've got this idea of 10,000 hours.
But it's clearly not a universal formula.
There are many different paths to expertise.
And that's exactly what we're going to explore more in part 2. We'll dive into some of those personal anecdotes from your sources.
Those real-life stories should give us an even clearer picture of how these principles play out in practice.
And how the 10,000 hour rule might need some tweaking. Or maybe even a complete rethink, depending on the person and their field. Welcome back to our deep dive into the 10,000 hour rule.
Yeah, we've been really unpacking this whole concept.
Moving beyond that simple, put in the time, become a master idea.
Right. It's way more nuanced than that.
Absolutely. Deliberate practice, talent, opportunity, all these pieces of the puzzle.
You know what I always find helpful? Hearing from people who've actually tried to put this idea into practice.
Oh yeah, those personal anecdotes can't beat real-world experience.
Okay, so this one was really interesting. This person was already a successful musician.
Okay, so not a beginner.
Not at all. They were doing well, but they felt like they'd hit a wall.
Kind of plateaued.
Exactly, like good wasn't good enough anymore.
I think a lot of people can relate to that feeling.
So what do? They went all in on the 10,000-hour rule.
Really doubled down on the practice hours.
Yep. Super strict schedule, hours every day. But here's the thing.
It didn't work.
They actually started feeling worse. Like they were just going through the motions.
Just repeating the same mistakes over and over.
And that's when they had this realization.
What was that?
They needed a new approach. They started breaking down their practice into smaller chunks.
More focused.
Exactly. Targeting specific weaknesses instead of just playing on autopilot.
So they were being more deliberate.
And they started recording themselves, asking other musicians for feedback.
Getting that outside perspective.
Sometimes you need someone else to point out what you're missing.
Totally. It's like you can't see the forest for the trees.
What I loved about this story was that even someone who was already talented and successful,
they still needed that focused approach.
It wasn't just about putting in the hours. It was about working smarter.
Not just harder.
Okay. Ready for a total curveball. This next one is from someone in finance.
Finance?
Yeah. And they actually think the 10,000-hour rule is harmful in their field.
Whoa, hold on now. Why would they say that?
Their point is that finance is all about constant change.
The markets are volatile. New information all the time.
You have to adapt quickly or you'll get left behind.
So their argument is that if you're clinging to the same knowledge for 10,000 hours...
you could actually be setting yourself up for failure.
Interesting. I never thought about it that way.
They said in a fast-paced field like that, it's more about being adaptable.
Learning quickly. Making decisions on the fly.
They even proposed a totally different idea.
Oh, what's that?
The 10,000 experiment rule.
The 10,000 what?
Experiment rule.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So instead of trying to master one specific skill...
you're constantly trying new things.
Exactly. Gathering feedback, adapting based on what works.
It's like rapid iteration, learning from your mistakes.
You're embracing the fact that you're gonna mess up, but you're learning from it and moving forward.
That's a completely different mindset.
And this person said that the traditional 10,000-hour mindset can actually make you overconfident. Like you think you've got it all figured out.
So you stop being open to new ideas.
Exactly. And that can be dangerous, especially in a field that's always evolving.
It seems like there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Right. The principles of deliberate practice are still valuable.
But how we apply them depends on our goals and what we're trying to achieve.
Okay, this last one really got me thinking.
What was that?
This person said the whole idea of mastery is kind of problematic.
Problematic? How so?
They said it creates this pressure to be perfect.
And that can hold us back.
We end up doubting ourselves or being afraid to try new things.
We're so focused on the end goal that we forget to enjoy the process.
They actually preferred the term craftsmanship.
Craftsmanship.
It implies a love of the process, a dedication to honing your skills, even when you're already really good. So maybe it's less about reaching some perfect endpoint.
And more about the journey.
I'm seeing a pattern here. It's not about hitting a magic number.
It's about that mindset of continuous learning and improvement.
Driven by a passion for what you're doing.
Embracing the challenges, the setbacks.
Celebrating the little wins.
Never losing that sense of wonder.
So what have we learned from all these personal stories?
I think the biggest takeaway is that there's no right answer.
The 10,000-hour rule isn't a universal formula.
It's about understanding the principles behind it and applying them in a way that works for you.
And that's what makes this deep dive so interesting.
We're not just memorizing a rule.
We're exploring different perspectives.
Challenging assumptions.
And coming to our own conclusions about what it really takes to achieve expertise.
With all these insights fresh in our minds.
I think we're ready for the final part of our deep dive.
Where we'll try to distill all of this into some practical takeaways. Stay tuned.
All right, so we spent this whole episode really digging into this 10,000-hour rule.
Yeah, we've gone from like, wow, 10,000 hours, that's it, to like, maybe not so simple.
We've kind of flipped it around, looked at it from all sides.
Origins, criticisms, those personal stories. What does it all mean? What's the takeaway?
I think the biggest thing is we can't just take this rule at face value.
Right. It's not just some passive thing you absorb. It's a jumping off point.
It's a reminder that becoming really good at something takes real effort.
And it's got to be the right kind of effort, you know?
We have to be intentional about our practice. Make every hour count.
And that means understanding what deliberate practice actually looks like.
It's not just clocking in the hours. It's about pushing ourselves
Stepping outside that comfort zone.
and getting feedback. Which, speaking of,
Oh yeah, it's amazing how much we miss when we're so focused on something.
until someone else points it out.
It's like those blind spots we all have.
One thing that really stood out to me was how important it is to be adaptable,
Especially in fields that are constantly changing, like technology.
or finance, like that expert we talked about.
Right. Maybe instead of trying to master one specific thing,
We need to be comfortable with always learning new things,
the 10,000 experiment rule, that was a really interesting alternative.
embracing those mistakes, iterating quickly, always trying new things.
It's a different way of thinking about expertise.
But even if we stick with the more traditional idea of practice,
There's still that key takeaway about mindset,
it's about believing we can improve.
not letting those challenges get us down.
That growth mindset, it's so powerful.
It keeps us going when things get tough, when we hit those plateaus.
And you know, I really like that idea of craftsmanship.
Yeah, that dedication to the process, the love of honing your skills,
Maybe it's less about reaching some kind of perfect endpoint.
and more about the journey itself.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
I want to leave you with this.
what's that one skill you really want to develop?
What's that area where you're ready to really push yourself?
It could be anything.
Yeah.
Learning a new language,
Yeah.
coding, writing, playing an instrument.
Whatever sparks your curiosity, gets you excited to learn.
And don't get overwhelmed by thinking about 10,000 hours.
Just think about that first step. What's one small thing you can do today?
Schedule some practice time. Find a teacher. Join a community of learners.
Maybe just commit to that first experiment.
The important thing is to start and then keep going.
Expertise isn't built overnight.
It's built one step at a time,
One focused effort.
one experiment.
So as you go on that journey, remember to enjoy the process
Celebrate those little wins.
and never lose sight of that joy of learning.
Who knows what amazing things you might achieve.
Until next time on The Deep Dive, keep practicing, keep experimenting, and keep that growth mindset burning bright.